IAO, the Supreme One of the Gnostics, the true God, is the Lord of this work. Let us therefore invoke him by that name which the companions of the Royal Arch blaspheme, to aid us in the essay, to declare the means which he has bestowed upon us. The divine consciousness, which is reflected and refracted in the works of genius, feeds upon a certain secretion, as I believe. This secretion is analogous to semen, but not identical with it. So closely is this secretion connected with the sexual economy that it appears to me at times as if it might be a byproduct of that process which generates semen. I find in myself that manifestations of mental creative force always concur with some abnormal condition of the physical powers of generation. To sum up, I can always trace a connection between my sexual condition and the condition of artistic creation, which is so close as to approach identity, and yet so loose that I cannot predicate a single important proposition. It is these considerations which give me pain when I am reproached by the ignorant with wishing to produce genius mechanically. I may fail, but my failure is 1,000 times greater than their utmost success. I shall therefore base my remarks not so much on the observations which I have myself made and the experiments which I have tried, as on the accepted classical methods of producing that energized enthusiasm which is the lever that moves God. The Greeks say that there are 3 methods of discharging the genial secretion of which I have spoken. They thought perhaps that their methods tended to secrete it, but this I do not believe altogether, or without a qualm, for the manifestation of force implies force, and this force must have come from somewhere. Easier I find it to say subconsciousness and secretion, rather than to postulate an external reservoir to extend my connotation of man than to invent God. However, parsimony apart, I find it in my experience that it is useless to flog a tired horse. There are times when I am absolutely bereft of even 1 drop of this elixir. Nothing will restore it, neither rest in bed, nor drugs, nor exercise. On the other hand, sometimes when after a severe spell of work I have been dropping with physical fatigue, perhaps sprawling on the floor, too tired to move hand or foot, the occurrence of an idea has restored me to perfect intensity of energy, and the working out of the idea has actually got rid of the aforesaid physical fatigue, although it involved a great additional labor. The difference between the madman and the genius is not in the quantity, but in the quality of their work. Genius is organized, madness chaotic. Often the organization of genius is on original lines, and ill-balanced and ignorant medicine men mistake it for disorder. The Greeks say that there are 3 methods of discharging the Leyden jar of genius. These 3 methods they assign to the 3 gods. These 3 gods are Dionysus, Apollo, Aphrodite. In English, wine, woman, and song. Now, it would be a great mistake to imagine that the Greeks were recommending a visit to a brothel. As well condemn the High Mass at St. Peter's on the strength of having witnessed a Protestant revival meeting. Disorder is always a parody of order, because there is no archetypal disorder that it might resemble. Owen Seaman can parody a poet, but nobody can parody Owen Seaman. A critic is a bundle of impressions. There is no ego behind it. All photographs are essentially alike. The works of all good painters essentially differ. Some writers suppose that in the ancient rites of the Eleusis, the high priest publicly copulated with the high priestess. Were this so, it would be no more indecent than it is blasphemous for the priest to make bread and wine and turn it into the body and blood of God. True, the Protestants will say that it is blasphemous, but a Protestant is one to whom all things sacred are profane, whose mind being all filth can see nothing in the sexual act but a crime or a jest, whose only facial gestures are the sneer and the leer. Protestantism is the excrement of human thought, and accordingly, in Protestant countries, art, if it exists at all, only exists to revolt. There are some people so simple as to think that, when they have proved the religious instinct to be a mere efflorescence of the sex instinct, they have destroyed religion. We should rather consider that the sailor's tavern gives him his only glimpse of heaven, just as the destructive criticism of the phallucists has only proved sex to be a sacrament. Consciousness, says the materialist, axe in hand, is a function of the brain. He has only reformulated the old saying, "Your bodies are the temples of the Holy Ghost." Now sex is justly hallowed in this sense, that is, the eternal fire of the race. Huxley admitted that some of the lower animalculae are, in a sense, immortal, because they always go on reproducing eternally by fission, and however often you divide x by 2, there is always something left. But he never seems to have seen that mankind is immortal in exactly the same sense, and goes on reproducing itself with similar characteristics through the ages, changed by circumstance indeed, but always identical in itself. But the spiritual flower of this process is that at the moment of discharge a physical ecstasy occurs, a spasm analogous to the mental spasm which meditation gives, and further, in the sacramental and ceremonial use of the sexual act, the divine consciousness may be attained. But admit its religious function, and one may at once lay down that the act must not be profaned. It must not be undertaken lightly and foolishly without excuse. It may be undertaken in obedience to real passion, for passion, as its name implies, is rather inspired by a force of divine strength and beauty without the will of the individual, often even against it. It is the casual or habitual, what Christ called idle use, or rather abuse of these forces, which constitutes their profanation. It will further be obvious that, if the act in itself is to be the sacrament in a religious ceremony, this act must be accomplished solely for the love of God. All personal considerations must be banished utterly, just as any priest can perform the miracle of transubstantiation, so can any man, possessing the necessary qualifications, perform this other miracle, whose nature must form the subject of a subsequent discussion. Personal aims being destroyed, it is a fortiori necessary to neglect social and other similar considerations. Physical strength and beauty are necessary and desirable for aesthetic reasons, the attention of the worshippers being liable to distraction if the celebrants are ugly, deformed, or incompetent. I need hardly emphasize the necessity for the strictest self-control and concentration on their part, as it would be blasphemy to enjoy the gross taste of the wine of the sacrament. So must the celebrant suppress even the minutest manifestation of animal pleasure. It is sufficient to say that the adepts have always known how to secure efficiency. The sexual excitement must be suppressed and transformed into its religious equivalent. With these preliminaries settled in order to guard against foreseen criticisms of the Protestants who, God having made them a little lower than the angels, have made themselves a great deal lower than the beasts, by their consistently bestial interpretation of all things human and divine, we may consider, first, the triune nature of these ancient methods of energizing enthusiasm. Music has two parts, tone or pitch, and rhythm. The latter quality associates it with the dance, and the part of the dancing which is not rhythm is sex. Now that part of sex which is not a form of the dance, animal movement, is intoxication of the soul, which connects it with the wine. Further identities will suggest themselves to the student. By the use of the three methods in one, the whole being of man may thus be stimulated. The music will create a general harmony of the brain, leading it its own paths. The wine affords a general stimulus of the animal nature, and the sex excitement elevates the moral nature of the man by its close analogy with the highest ecstasy It remains, however, always for him to make the final transmutation, unless he have the special secretion which I have postulated, the result will be commonplace. So consonant is this system with the nature of man that it is exactly parodied and profaned, not only in the sailor's tavern, but in the society ball. Here, for the lowest natures the result is drunkenness, disease, and death. For the middle natures a gradual blunting of the finer feelings. For the higher, an exhilaration amounting at the best to the foundation of a lifelong love. If these society rites are properly performed, there should be no exhaustion. After a ball, one should feel the need of a long walk in the young morning air. The weariness of boredom, the headache of somnolence, are nature's warning. Now the purpose of such a ball, the moral attitude on entering, seems to be of supreme importance. If you go with the idea of killing time, you are rather killing yourself. Baudelaire speaks of the first period of love, when the boy kisses the trees of the woods, rather than kiss nothing. At the age of 36, I found myself at Pompeii, passionately kissing the great grave statue of a woman that stands in the Avenue of the Tombs. Even now, as I wake in the morning, I sometimes fall to kissing my own arms. It is with such a feeling that one should go to a ball, and with such a feeling intensified, purified, and exalted, that one should leave it. If this be so, how much more if one go with a direct religious purpose burning in one's whole being? Beethoven roaring at the sunrise is no strange spectacle to me, who shout with joy and wonder when I understand, without which one cannot really be said ever to see, a blade of grass. I fall upon my knees in speechless adoration at the moon. I hide my eyes in holy awe from a good Van Gogh. Imagine, then, a ball in which the music is the choir celestial, the wine of the Grail, or that of the Sabbath of the Adepts, and one's partner, the infinite and eternal one, the true and living God Most High. Go even to a common ball, the Moulin de Galat, will serve even the least of my magicians, with your whole soul aflame within you, and your whole will concentrated on these transubstantiations, and tell me what miracle takes place. It is in the hate of, the distaste for, life, that sends one to the ball when one is old. When one is young, one is on springs until the hour falls. But the love of God, which is the only true love, diminishes not with age. It grows deeper and intenser with every satisfaction. It seems as if in the noblest men this secretion constantly increases, which certainly suggests an external reservoir, so that age loses all its bitterness. We find Brother Lawrence, Nicholas Herman of Lorraine, at the age of 80, in continuous enjoyment of union with God. Buddha at an equal age would run up and down the 8 high trances like an acrobat on a ladder. Stories not too dissimilar are told of Bishop Berkeley. Many persons have not attained union at all until middle age, and then have rarely lost it. It is true that genius in the ordinary sense of the word has nearly always showed itself in the young. Perhaps we should regard such cases as Nicholas Herman as cases of acquired genius. Now I am certainly of the opinion that genius can be acquired, or, in the alternative, that it is an almost universal possession. Its rarity may be attributed to the crushing influence of a corrupted society. It is rare to meet a youth without high ideals, generous thoughts, a sense of holiness, of his own importance, which, being interpreted, is of his own identity with God. 3 years in the world, and he is a bank clerk, or even a government official. Only those who intuitively understand from early boyhood that they must stand out, and who have the incredible courage and endurance to do so in face of all that tyranny, callousness, and the scorn of inferiors can do, only these arrive at manhood uncontaminated. Every serious or spiritual thought is made a jest. Poets are thought soft and cowardly. Apparently, They are the only boys with a will of their own, and courage to hold out against the whole school. Boys and masters in league as once were Palladi and Herod. Honor is replaced by expediency, holiness by hypocrisy. The Hindus are wiser. At the well-watched hour of puberty, the boy is prepared as for a sacrament. He is led to a duly consecrated temple, and there by a wise and holy woman, skilled in the art, and devoted to this end, he is initiated with all solemnity into the mystery of life. The act is thus declared religious, sacred, impersonal, utterly apart from amorisms and eroticism and animalism and sentimentalism and all the other vileness that Protestantism has made of it. The Catholic Church did, I believe, to some extent preserve the pagan tradition. Marriage is a sacrament, but in the attempt to deprive the act of all accretions which would profane it, the fathers of the Church added in spite of themselves other accretions which profaned it more. They tied it to property and inheritance. They wished it to serve both God and Mammon. The Hindus warned their pupils against the dangers of breathing exercises. Indeed, the slightest laxness in moral or physical tissues may cause the energy accumulated by the practice to discharge itself by involuntary emission. I have known this to happen in my own experience. It is then of the utmost importance to realize that the relief of the tension is to be found in what the Hebrews and the Greeks called prophesying, and what is better when organized into art. The disorderly discharge is mere waste, a wilderness of howlings. The orderly discharge is a Prometheus unbound, or a Laga d'Arin, according to the special aptitudes of the enthused person. But it must be remembered that special aptitudes are very easy to acquire if the driving force of enthusiasm be great. If you cannot keep the rules of others, you make rules of your own. One set turns out in the long run to be just as good as another. Henry Rousseau, the Donneur, was laughed at all his life. I laughed as heartily as the rest, though, almost despite myself. I kept on saying, as the phrase goes, that I felt something, couldn't say what. The moment it occurred to somebody to put up all his paintings in one room by themselves, it was instantly apparent that his naivete was the simplicity of a master. Let no one then imagine that I fail to perceive or underestimate the dangers of employing these methods. The occurrence even of so simple a matter as fatigue might change a las meninas into a stupid sexual crisis. It will be necessary for most Englishmen to emulate the self-control of the Arabs and Hindus, whose ideal is to deflower the greatest possible number of virgins. 80 is considered a fairly good performance, without completing the act. It is indeed of the first importance for the celebrant in any phallic rite to be able to complete the act without even once allowing a sexual or sensual thought to invade his mind. The mind must be as absolutely detached from one's own body as it is from another person's. Of musical instruments, few are suitable. The human voice is the best, and the only one which can be usefully employed in chorus. Anything like an orchestra implies infinite rehearsal, and introduces an atmosphere of artificiality. The organ is a worthy solo instrument, and is an orchestra in itself, while its tone and associations favor the religious idea. The violin is the most useful of all, for its every mood expresses the hunger for the infinite, and yet it is so mobile that it has a greater emotional range than any of its competitors. Accompaniment must be dispensed with unless a harpist be available. The harmonium is a horrible instrument, if only because of its associations, and the piano is like unto it, although, if unseen and played by a Pedruski, it would serve. The trumpet and the bell are excellent to startle at the cries of a ceremony, hot, drubbing, passionate, in a different class of ceremony, a class more intense and direct, but on the whole less exalted. The tom-tom stands alone. It combines well with the practice of mantra, and it is the best accompaniment for any sacred dance. Of sacred dances, the most practical for a gathering is the seated dance. One sits cross-legged on the floor and sways to and fro from the hips in time with the mantra. A solo or duet of dances as a spectacle rather distracts from this exercise. I would suggest a very small and very brilliant light on the floor in the middle of the room. Such a room is best floored with mosaic marble. An ordinary Freemason's lodge carpet is not a bad thing. The eyes, if they see anything at all, see then only the rhythmical or mechanical squares leading in perspective to the simple unwinking light. The swinging of the body with the mantra, which has a habit of rising and falling as if of its own accord in a very weird way, becomes more accentuated. Ultimately, a curiously spasmodic stage occurs, and then the consciousness flickers and goes out, perhaps breaks through into the divine consciousness, perhaps is merely recalled to itself by some variable and external impression. The above is a very simple description of a very simple and earnest form of ceremony, based entirely upon rhythm. It is very easy to prepare, and its results are usually very encouraging for the beginner. Wine, being a mocker and strong drink raging, its use is more likely to lead to trouble than mere music. One essential difficulty is dosage. One needs exactly enough, and, as Blake points out, one can only tell what is enough by taking too much. For each man the dose varies enormously, so does it for the same man at different times. The ceremonial escape from this is to have a noiseless attendant to bear the bowl of libation and present it to each in turn at frequent intervals. Small doses should be drunk and the bowl passed on, taken as the worshipper deems advisable. Yet the cupbearer should be an initiate and use his own discretion before presenting the bowl. The slightest sign that intoxication is mastering the man should be a sign to him to pass that man. This practice can be easily fitted to the ceremony previously described. If desired, instead of wine, the elixir introduced by me to Europe may be employed, but its results, if used in this way, have not as yet been thoroughly studied. It is my immediate purpose to repair this neglect. The sexual excitement, which must complete the harmony of methods, offers a more difficult problem. It is exceptionally desirable that the actual bodily movements involved should be decorous, in the highest sense, and many people are so ill-trained that they will be unable to regard such a ceremony with any but critical or lascivious eyes. Either would be fatal to all the good already done. It is presumably better to wait until all present are greatly exalted before risking a profanation.